Hey all, welcome to Unbiased Rugby and welcome to Overlap Rugby. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having us. It's good to be back on YouTube.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually feel, I was trying to work out, I think I've done like one video in the past couple of months, which has been quite bad.
Yeah.
But I think the domestic season's about to start here again, so I just thought, time to actually get back into it.
Yeah, exactly.
We're in the same boat.
We're in the same boat, except we're a few weeks behind you. Our domestic season restarted, but we are finally getting back on the horse.
Yes.
And we will be back making content over the coming weeks now as well. Looking forward to the internationals as well, which are coming up towards the end of the year. So we should be back swinging for them.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's going to be absolutely great. Just there in the comments, Sinbin, we're actually going to be chatting about that exact question a little bit later. It got South Africans heading north. So I think you guys sent a really good agenda. I think you guys put a hell of a lot of homework into it compared to what I normally do. So I think that's awesome. So we'll just follow the agenda that you've got there, and
sure.
And yeah. I think maybe because we were going to talk about the South African side, maybe you want to ask the questions from your point of view, and then I'll try to answer them if I can.
Yeah, that makes good sense.
Yeah, of course. Okay, yeah. So I guess the way to frame this really is just that obviously with the pandemic everything's been accelerated, but over the last sort of number of years we've been reading a lot and hearing a lot about the possibility of global calendars and the possibility of everything changing. Japan have emerged as a potential force. And it just feels like a key time in terms of world rugby. You know, you have Argentina who aren't really sure where they're going to go. Are they going to try and set up a professional league in South America, or are they going to stick in the Rugby Championship? Are Japan going to be let into the Rugby Championship? Is it possible to get some Pacific Island teams in there? And then there's the big question of South Africa, and I think that's sort of on what a lot of this hinges. Like, is the season going to get a shake-up to the point where South Africa go north, South Africa stay south, or South Africa, stays essentially within themselves and play a domestic league and maybe continue to play in the Rugby Championship? And I think before Sansa or anyone wants to pull the trigger on getting Japan in, I think everything sort of hinges on what South Africa's decision is. And I genuinely don't know in terms of taking the temperature what the mood is over there in terms of do you guys see yourselves going north? Is that the talk at the moment?
I think it's quite divided, and I think it changes from day to day. And I think, like growing up, I've grown up with Super Rugby my entire life, or almost not my entire life. I'm a lot older than that. So, and it's always been part of the landscape here, and I've always supported my teams, and slowly over time it's become a bigger competition. Yes, I think it has lost a lot of its luster over the last couple of years. And the travel is quite a heavy factor with that competition. It is a really heavy factor. You can't deny it. I think it's a 24 to 48 hour flight. It can be anywhere 24 to 48 hour flight from South Africa to New Zealand. So it's quite harsh to do. But on the other hand, most of our players playing up north in any case. Our top stars are already playing up there. So we don't have this. Well, we got rid of the cap rule because we just couldn't compete.
Yeah.
So you can hear from my answer that I'm not 100% sure. I think if I just thought of South Africa and I didn't think of anything else, I'd probably say it's probably in our best interest to go north. From a financial point of view, we've already went from 1,000 contracted players down to just under 500 contracted players in one year. Wow. So to try to keep up with the talent, we obviously need the money, and we just don't have the same. We just don't have the same kind of. Maybe if we had a Japan, that Japan's got quite a lot of revenue inside that. Maybe if Japan was more invested in Super Rugby, or they had more sides in Super Rugby. Maybe there'd be a little bit more revenue, but Japanese, they've got such a great domestic league. I don't see that ever.
Yeah, I was just saying that, and the Sunwolves seems like a bit of an afterthought for them in terms of how they use them. They're abandoning them now, and it's just Super Rugby has been, like, over the last few years. You're right to say it's diminished, but there's an element of which the tinkering and the changing with the format and the layout has kind of diminished people's interest in the competition. I think it's fair to say, because it's so convoluted now. That it's hard to get invested. And there are similar risks attached to bringing the South African teams in up north potentially. Like you could potentially kind of that there's fears about that with the Champions Cup for sure. There's pushback on having them come into that competition, but I kind of am of the opinion that there's just such good quality in South Africa, and it makes good sense. And as you rightly point out, so many of their players are playing in Europe. I think that the pros outweigh the cons for me, just looking at it. And I think another point on this kind of global calendar thing, the club game is very often an afterthought when you're mentioning things like global calendar. I never think that that's going to be viable. I don't think it's going to happen. But one of the better ways to divide, we see actually north-south as the main divide. But for South Africa, it doesn't suit because, as you say, it takes so long to get to New Zealand that it's kind of a moot point. It's kind of easier to go in blocks, like time zones rather than actual latitude. You could have Argentina join the MLS or something similar to that. Now, they would hose through that competition, and it's still up to them. They may want to still play with the big boys in Super Rugby and the Rugby Championship. But South Africa joining Europe would just make a lot of sense in terms of how it would work out time-wise and how it would bolster the competitions. Certainly for the Pro 14, it would enhance it a lot because the Cheetahs are already good value, and I think better sides playing in a proper competition would be good for all concerned.
If I look at because the Cheetahs play a fairly entertaining brand of rugby. So
they do, yeah.
They generally, the Cheetahs have always been the second favourite team in South Africa by most people. So they have their primary team, and then the Cheetahs are their second team.
Yeah.
And it's just the big problem with the Cheetahs is they're very good at identifying talent. They're just not very good at keeping their talent. And
of course,
they just don't have the. You've got to see the town Bloemfontein where they're from. It's the capital of that state, but it doesn't have the same kind of financial power as say the Stormers. Stormers are flat broke, but but maybe like the Bulls have got a lot of cash at the moment, so I think that's their biggest problem is just trying to keep their talent. But I think they've got a lot of players that are coming back. Like I think of Franz Steyn that's going to come back to the Cheetahs. He's going to bring absolute value.
Brilliant.
That seems to be a top-down policy from Rassie Erasmus, kind of now director of rugby. He seems to have really kind of focused. Like he got the Springboks in order in a very quick turnaround for the cycle for the World Cup. Then he stepped aside. He's got new coaching in. He seems to be focusing on those Super Rugby teams, getting those provinces playing proper rugby again and looking like themselves. Because for a few years there were inconsistencies of performance throughout the South African domestic competition, and probably a fall off in standard as well, just as more players filtered north. And Rassie seems to have really addressed that, which is good to see.
I think if you look at schoolboy rugby in South Africa is absolutely amazing. I'll send you some videos after some links to some videos. Absolutely amazing games. So you have 25,000 people come watching a game. So schoolboy rugby is really big, and we play a certain style of rugby till up to the age of 19, and then you hit Super Rugby, and then we decided, okay, let's start playing expansive. And it's like, come on, you've got this great talent, and then you want them to go start playing this expansive game, which they're just not used to. I think we've started improving playing the expansive style, but Rassie has brought back to the fore that we've got to really play to our strengths. We've got some amazing wings and all of that, but South Africa's strength does come from the front.
Yes.
It always has.
Always been a power game. It's always been formidable for any side facing the Springboks. That's the first concern, is just the contact zone is going to be unpleasant all day long, and hopefully we can get parity is always the goal going in for any side. New Zealand or England the same, and more often than not they struggle. But Rassie has found that identity where before you were all over the place under what was his name again? Alistair Coetzee. That was kind of the lowest ebb of like Springbok identity kind of up in smoke, whereas Rassie did get back to fundamentals. But as you say, the wingers are their killers.
No question. Rassie's brought back that edge to the Springboks that they were missing. And he's trying. You can see even through the Sharks and even through the Bulls, you saw evidence that things were just tightening up a little bit compared to the super looseness that had typified South African Super Rugby.
Yes.
So no, I don't doubt that the club game is in a very decent place. And I see you've headlined sort of, can the South African teams add value? That's the title of it. Of course they could add value. Like in any competition, they'd be a massive value. It's one of the biggest.
I just love to see the Sharks play Leinster or something.
I love that.
Geez,
game.
that'd be
That's
great.
Such
like,
a game.
Geez,
two great defenses.
Would anybody get any points between those two defenses?
It could be like a 10,
nil all draw
because they're both so elite.
They just can't cancel each other out.
Who knows?
But it would be awesome to see. But I think that's the next, in terms of the next phase of Rassie's decision making, just to sort of bring it back to where they go. It is, as you say, it is a divided issue, but they're going to have to make a decision. Like you outlined, Shane, there's sort of the three blocks that could take hold in terms of the new global look to rugby, where there's a block of the Americas. They have their own professional leagues in North and South, with Argentina and Uruguay, all those emerging nations. Whether that's the best thing for Argentina, who knows? Then you could have the Eastern Bloc with Japan and the Pacific Islands and New Zealand and Australia, and perhaps then Europe and South Africa would be in a block of their own. But I think in terms that, obviously revenue-wise, that's massive. And I think you have to factor that in. What are the positives? You know, you're going to have games with less travel, not no travel, but less travel. Yeah. You're going to be playing teams with the right time zones. You're going to have more money. So for all of those reasons, you're still going to be playing elite competition. So for all of those reasons, it might be a positive. But then the things that have to be considered are the potential negatives, and there are plenty of them as well. Like if South Africa wants to join a Pro 14 competition, and listen, we're Leinster fans, the Pro 14 has very much dipped in standard of late, and it's in possibly as weak a place as it's ever been in terms of the quality of the teams. The Welsh club game is in disarray. Mm-hmm. The Scottish club game is as it was, with two teams pretty weak. Likewise, the Italians. So it's just not a very strong competition. And then if you're going to chuck a lot of South African teams onto it and create a Pro 16, you run the risk of doing exactly what Super Rugby did, where you can't even get a proper regular season in. Yeah. Everyone's playing mixed. You have this conference system, and nobody really knows, and you don't even get the big games in the regular season until the very end. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, it could just be another disinterested mess. Mm-hmm. And then there's obviously the issue of not playing against New Zealand sides. I think one of the strengths that South Africa have is that they're constantly forced. They're constantly aware of just how quick and good the game can be, because, you know, no matter how big for your boots you get, you're going to get a humbling at some point if you're constantly playing New Zealand sides, either at domestic or international level.
Very true.
So there's that factor to consider as well. So it's actually a tough spot for Rassie Erasmus. Obviously, the pandemic might force their hand, in the sense that the income might stop. They might just be in such desperate need for the revenue. Is
complaining about the revenue. Like, we haven't seen any South African sides since the lockdown. They're the only country not back playing any rugby yet, because Cheetahs obviously didn't get to do any of their Pro 14 fixtures with the Kings because they went bust. So
the other thing not considered by South Africa is the actual time at the moment. We talk about a global calendar, but if South Africa was to join the northern calendar, you're talking about playing the peak of the season in high summer in South Africa, which is like a different kind of heat.
Yeah.
Like I was trying to say, you know, I was born in Durban. That's where my whole family's from, and I'm not lying to you. And February is like walking through soup. It's that intense. And like, I get out of the plane now when we go visit there, and it's so uncomfortable. It's 100% humidity. It's 30 degrees Celsius, and that's 6 o'clock in the evening. You know, so
that is tough to play rugby in. That is tough to play rugby in. It's not even healthy.
It's what's happened is it's good and it's bad, because the ball's super wet. So the skills improve quite quickly with the players, but we would probably end up playing those kind of games probably about 9 o'clock at night, which is going to effectively make the time zone thing null and void. But that's the only way. That's the only way I can see really playing, especially in Durban. So it'd be a bit of later games, and it'll probably be 20 minutes, 5-minute break. I think that's the only way you can do it. So I think there are ways around it, but sure. I just know Durban's super uncomfortable in February. It really is uncomfortable.
That would definitely be an issue. But like, as you say, like, it may just be a welcome new challenge. Like, it may be just tough, you know. Like, if you have a big fixture against a South African team in South Africa around Christmas, you know that's what's going to come. Even if you're Edinburgh or someone who's up in winter in Scotland and has to go and travel, that's a very tough adjustment. But then similarly, it'll be a tough adjustment for the South African teams, who will invariably have to travel to some of these other climates. I don't necessarily mind that different picture of the game. That's one of the good things I love about having the Cheetahs in the Pro 14 in the comp is that Bloemfontein Stadium with altitude. It just is a different dynamic and creates better, more fun games and good challenges for some attacking sides who want. Yeah, it's like because a lot of times it's very relevant because a lot of times World Cups, like the Japanese one was one. It's going to be France in a few years' time. That'll be summer is usually when rugby is played in come World Cup time. So it's not a bad thing to have those conditions thrust upon you in the club game. Because I know that we're normally kind of well adjusted and acclimatized to playing muck rugby and winter rugby, but then sometimes off the pace when that comes in. So I wouldn't mind that. One thing that I see a comment there asking, I think David asking about what the crowd numbers are like in the Pro 14. The answer is in terms of like Leinster v Munster, great. Those are usually really well attended, even relative to other leagues. But in general, relatively low. And I think they have actually decreased or were on the decrease this season pre-COVID. So I don't know if the interest is necessarily there in all the countries involved in the Pro 14. However, Champions Cup attendances are generally very good. They tend to be full. And if you throw in a load more South African teams and a lot more quality into that league and a few more stakes as well, because if you throw them in and let them qualify for Champions Cup as well, don't have like the Cheetahs are now, where even if they get a playoff place, they're not allowed to play in Europe as it stands. That feels a bit wrong because it takes one of the carrots from the Cheetahs in terms of why would we invest in this comp, and it also just cheapens the comp as well because one of the best teams in it won't be playing.
From a South African point of view, if you want to move north, I would hold the Champions Cup as a sticking point, because the Champions Cup is the true equivalent to Super Rugby. Pro 14 is not equivalent; it's a lower standard. You would get the opposite of a shock just playing in that tournament. It's played to less intensity. They do try and throw the ball around, so it's actually similar in style often. But it's a much lower standard than Super Rugby, where the Champions Cup, like if you get to the business end of that competition down to the last 8, there are proper tough games. They're comparable to Super Rugby. So in terms of just driving the standard up, that's the sticking point that you'd have to have if you want to move north. You'd have to be welcomed into the Champions Cup. But then I think the final point, and it's something that you touched on before the show, and that I'd put to you, is just that I don't think there is a scenario where South Africa can move their club game up north without moving their test game up north. And that's 100 years of tradition sort of being, circumvented. You'd have to play in the Six Nations, which is, a brutal competition. But obviously, that's putting to bed the history of the Tri-Nations and the Rugby Championship and all those tests with those tours of New Zealand over all those years, playing games against the All Blacks every year. It would be quite a sacrifice and quite a culture shock and a change for South African rugby. So I'm just curious how you feel about that.
Well, I think we forget, because we get to watch it every single year. We get to play the All Blacks twice a year, and generally the All Black games are your biggest revenue games. They're the biggest revenue games in the world. They've got the highest viewership. So we're very, very fortunate. Yes, okay, 2 games in a row we lost by 57 points, but let's not think about that too much. I think there might. I'd like to stay in the Rugby Championship. I agree with you that if we go north, then we've actually got to go. We've got to go north completely. I know that. Look, there's so many permutations at the moment. Like I think Australia brought up the fact that they want to create their own champions, like their own Heineken competition with South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. That might be an option, but it's tough. And I love the Six Nations. I think it's an excellent competition. I love that it's only one round. I think home and away means something. Thanks, 11, Jay said. Thank you very much.
Yes, gentlemen. I agree. Well, there'll be traditionalists in terms of that point. There'll be traditionalists on either side, protectionists about both the Six Nations and the Rugby Championship and or Tri-Nations, depending who you ask. There'll definitely be pushback against that kind of revolutionary idea, because it is that really, but it is one that I think has more merit than the idea of the global calendar that's been peddled, where they're trying to sync up all these kind of, well, the hemispheres apart and climates apart, and tradition of like the revenue in February from the Six Nations, February on.
Well, that's just a World Rugby passion project that everyone insists is necessary, but nobody ever actually explains why or how they're going to do it. Like that's a very strange one. The global calendar.
I don't think it's not feasible.
No, it doesn't.
It just doesn't make
seem tenable.
No, it doesn't. It's sort of a fake solution, but I think it comes from a place of sort of general anxiety about whether or not the current model is sustainable, and that's the burning question. We're chatting a lot about club sides tonight. Obviously, club games make a lot less revenue than test games.
Yeah.
So there's a school of thought that you should beef up the test games, etc. But it's a question for the bookmakers at South African rugby, if they're looking at the current system, and obviously amidst a global pandemic as well, which just it keeps the pressure on even further. They're going to have to figure out if it's sustainable financially, and if not, then perhaps pull the trigger on what would be a seismic shift.
Yeah,
I would say for our part, we're kind of rooting for you to come up, because it would be for like if you were to join the Pro 14. That would be a huge change to the league, and it would be massive even for a team like Leinster. I mean, we just won the Pro 14 at the weekend. We're obviously lifelong Leinster fans, and we had an unbeaten season. It was great. We're feeling like the Crusaders up in here. We're delighted, but at the same time, there has to be an acknowledgement that the standard isn't there. And actually, it would be better for everybody if we got the lessons that South African rugby have, and if we got to play like the same reason that the South Africans standard is driven up by playing Kiwi sides every year. I think our standard would be driven up by playing South African sides in our domestic competition, and even playing.
If you look at a side like the Crusaders, they've got a team like the Hurricanes. They've got to compete against the Hurricanes on their day. It's impossible to beat.
Yeah, even the Blues this year.
Even the Blues, which is absolutely amazing that the Blues are back. I think they're gonna win it next year.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that.
But it's also coming back to the coaching. I think South Africa's already got Felix Jones. He's now based in Europe. So the writing's been on the wall for a while, and you can see Russie's been planning this for a bit. And in Russie we trust. We know whatever he wants to do, let's just do it.
Yeah, for sure.
That might be a decent place to park that one.
But in essence we don't know, but we would certainly welcome you up here in Europe.
I think it'd be brilliant. I think it'd be brilliant for us. I think from an Irish point of view, just anything that drives the standard up, anything to help better prepare us for a World Cup quarterfinal.
That's exactly where
we need to win one of those.
But it's a nice segue going to what you thought of this. I know it's been quite a broken season with the Pro 14. What was your overall feel for the comp? And obviously I know your team won, so you must be super happy.
Yeah, but, delighted with the legacy of Leinster for sure.
Leinster is a great, like, we've been following Leinster since we were very young. We were sort of just raised into it, and really from the infancy of the side, and then being a side with a lot of flash with Brian O'Driscoll in it, a player who we've never had a player better, and in that era we were all flash but no finesse, no finish. We never won anything.
We go away to Toulouse and win one of the greatest games ever, and then tamely lose a home semi-final to Munster the week after. That kind of stuff.
Exactly. And to watch that team evolve slowly into a team with like an academy that is comparable, as good as any academy in World Rugby,
for sure,
in terms of producing talent. And then constant winning and constant improvement and driving the standard up. It has been sort of a pleasure and an honour to be a fan of Leinster. It has been phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I don't think, and it's sort of as I alluded to before, if we like to try and be unbiased as you're unbiased rugby as well. So if you zoom out and look at the competition,
Leinster have accomplished that feat with their B team for the most part throughout.
Exactly.
The standard's just not there week to week.
It's been too easy, and there's lingering problems. Obviously, Irish rugby pretty strong. Ulster made the final, Munster made the semi-final. There are issues with both teams, and obviously you can't have every team be a world-beating team. But it's really just a lack of challenge. One or other of the Scottish teams can turn it on each year, but it's quite a small nation with only the two sides. As you say, the Italian sides are never at the level.
They are both improving, to be fair to the Italian sides, but one of our toughest matches was 3-0 in Zebra, but they're still start coming from such a lower point. They're not competitors
but
yet.
I think if you zoom in, like, the real issue is that the Welsh sides in particular, Welsh club rugby has been sort of just a slow failure now for a number of years, with their sides just getting worse and worse. It's a country, that has a similar population to Ireland, does better than Ireland on the international stage consistently.
More of a tradition of rugby being the poor man's sport, because we have GAA and other sports to contend with for eyeballs here, whereas they are a rugby mad nation, but their club sides.
Yeah, their club sides are not at the level. And it's a curiosity. They always put it together in Test rugby. They win Six Nations. They get to World Cup semi-finals. They're never too far away. But at a club level, they're kind of at sea, and their attendances are down.
Yeah.
There's a side, the Ospreys, that play in Swansea, Welsh side, who were once a brilliant team, but they play their home games in the same stadium as Swansea City Football Club, the soccer team that plays in the Championship. And on one day, it'll be completely empty for an Ospreys game, even in a European match. Mm-hmm. And then the next day, Swansea are playing a championship game against Brentford, and it's full.
Yeah.
So
one of the sides that benefited from COVID, just disguising that fact.
I find it hard to make sense of it, but I think that's the real weakness in the competition, and it's definitely a competition that's close to its knees. And when a few years ago we were so optimistic about the expansion, getting the Cheetahs in and getting
improving, and maybe an American team. Were good. Scarlets were good a few years back. They've fallen off as well.
One of my favorite games I've ever watched was a Scarlets game. Amazing, expansive. It was just balls being thrown everywhere.
Scarlets is actually it's a different kind of animal. Scarlets is a proper rugby club, in Wales is well supported. It just happens to be it's actually a really small region, Llanelli. Yeah. It's a very, very small region in Wales, and they're rugby mad, and they have a great rugby tradition. They're everything you want a proper club to be. They have an identity, and they are the most successful of the Welsh teams.
Yeah,
but it's such a small region that it can't really compete with the Leinsters of the world, and with nothing else coming through from the Welsh sides and more and more talent being exported, you just wonder what really has happened to the competition. And when I zoom out and look at it that way, when a few years ago we were so optimistic, and now there's no competition at all. The closest game we get run is Munster basically trying to squeeze the life out of us, a domestic game. It's concerning. It is concerning for us. Thankfully, we have the European Cup from a Leinster point of view, which is the actual step up and the actual competition.
Yeah.
But for a domestic league, certainly is something that the South African sides are looking to join. It does have to be factored in that the standard really isn't great outside of Leinster. I
watch a lot of Premiership rugby. I watch a hell of a lot of it because I find it's probably the best competition to watch. The top team play the bottom team, and it's still quite very entertaining. Because they're very, very close. Some teams cheat with their market, their salary cap.
Yes. Well, that's always fun. Some teams.
That brings me back to my question. Do you think if there was more money in Pro 14 for a salary cap, because I know that the salary cap's a lot lower in Pro 14, if there was maybe £1 million more per team or something that kind of, do you think that would create something where you could maybe get some marquee players and stuff like that?
I really don't know. To be honest with you, I don't know that the money's there. The salary cap, I don't think is what's keeping the Welsh sides from strengthening or even holding on to their players. I mean, it's possible. It's possible one or two more big signings could come in, but sort of from the Irish teams are sort of boxed in by IRFU protocols, which are more strict about bringing in foreign players. You can't have. I don't think you can have more than 3. If they can't be Irish qualified playing in your team. I think that's just an IRFU rule. Mm-hmm. And then in Wales, just the money is not there, and the money that is in Welsh rugby is not being invested in the club game. So they're not about to make marquee signings either. So I don't know. In terms of driving the standard up, I think the closest model obviously is Leinster, which is not a one-to-one comparison with anyone because we are such a big region. We have the capital city and everything.
Yeah.
So we obviously had that built-in infrastructure and that built-in player base to develop an academy. But I think slowly, I think for a Pro 14 side, that is the model for the Welsh sides, getting sort of young talent and trying to harness it with elite coaches from a very young age, getting them on the right regiment, getting them good coaching from a very young age, and then getting them experience, bedding them in
good
slowly.
Standard of schoolboy competition
I think that sort of
and then,
slow, boring process is probably the best approach for those Pro 14 sides, but I see precious little of it.
Well, the issue is that it's not a quick book. You could just as easily sign on the dotted line and give CBC control of the comp and take $1 million and whatever. But there's less prudence in that and less patience in that as well. I definitely think it's easy to say from a Leinster point of view that the academy is key, but you're starting to see that even in the Champions Cup level, like Toulouse have regenerated themselves thanks in no small part to their academy and the fact that it's a sustainable club, as not just a pet project for a millionaire or a billionaire or someone's going to come in, buy a load of marquee players, try and buy a few trophies with the money, but not actually build anything, not actually create any infrastructure there to kind of pave. Issa Nasiwa put it great in a great interview actually after winning his last trophy with Leinster. He was talking about it's not about the fourth star on the jersey, although that's very special. It's about the path to the next 10 stars. That's what's important to him and should be important to a club side, is to try and build the foundations and try and make something that'll last. And I
look at all the big sides. You take like the Crusaders. You're talking about Toulouse and stuff like that. There's a certain formula that they have. They've got a great academy. So they've got these young players coming through. They've got an exceptional type 5. So there's a lot of things that are tick boxes. The coaches generally follow one from the next, so they have that same culture that always keeps going. And I think the great sides, you can see it follows a formula. Everyone goes, well, how did the Crusaders and Leinster get it right? And you just say, well, there's the formula.
Patience. It's the formula, and it involves patience. And Toulouse are a young team rising back to that, to their dizzy heights. They're obviously a 4-star team and European royalty, but they were in the doldrums for years, and it took pretty much a generation. There were a few periods of transition, a few seasons that they weren't at their best, and they've built back up on the strength of their academy and some good French coaching. And actually, Sarries say again.
They have a good number 15.
They do.
Oh my God.
They have one of the best.
He can play anywhere. He plays on the wing for them at the moment, Cheslin, but he's unbelievable. He scored a try the other week where he actually bumped off Ehio West and stormed in, just cut. I think it was La Rochelle, cut them to ribbons.
It was,
but he's an absolute joy to watch, and he's a superstar in France at the moment. He's on billboards and everything. They love him.
To be fair, his footwork is so
one of the most box office players in world rugby, if not the most.
Well, I was going to make the point actually just about Saracens as well, and we love trashing Saracens. It seems to be the go-to thing. It's like a recreational kind of let's dump on Sarries, aren't they? Big cheating. We'll swear, and certainly in Rob Baxter and Exeter's mind, they were always the good guys up against the big behemoth of the bad guys that are Saracens. But to be fair to Saracens, when you look at their roster and their squad, a lot of them are their academy products, and they're young guys who they've brought through their system, as well as the big marquee signings that they're making. And then only just the other week, I watched one of the Premiership games, which was Sarries Exeter, and both of them rolled out their B teams, and Sarries hosed them. So there's one point you made about the World Cup, as much as it's fun to relegate Sarries, and they do deserve it, they were cheating. Them being out of the Premiership does diminish that comp, and without Saracens playing the quality rugby they played last year, England would not have made the final of the World Cup. If Exeter were the best team in England last year, they'd have been looking at a quarter-final exit similar to other teams.
I think also that Saracens, another thing about sort of those big clubs, and I think the Saracens will be back and they'll be one of the biggest clubs in England, but what they have been is on the forefront of cutting-edge attacking coaching. I think Mark McCall's coaching ticket, it informed that England attack that we saw last year with all those attacking kicks, the pressure that they put on their opposition, the basic screen shape that they implemented, and then all the variants within that. It was the Saracens was the template for all of that, and it ended up with an incredible win against the All Blacks, and obviously just falling short against the deserved world champions, the Springboks, just to remind you for that one, Don.
Yeah.
But
I haven't forgotten. I was going to put a picture up, but I thought
it's more graceful if we're the ones to mention it, I guess.
Sorry. I have to say something. TSG Fortnite. I'm sorry. That's just not the nicest thing I've ever heard. How can you support the Stormers? Sorry.
I'm sensing some old rivalry here. I should put out.
No, it's just
Munster comes in, we'll have that.
Traditionally, the Bulls and the Stormers don't really like each other. Traditionally.
Yeah. and I'd say modern times is probably the same.
It's like me coming up to you and say, "Well, why aren't you wearing a red jersey?"
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a dangerous game.
don't even own one. The Lions. Sorry, we do have the next time I'll wear a red jersey is when we're visiting South Africa with the Lions. That's the plan. But just touching on the Pro16 and Pro14 potential and just the state of play and all this. Like, I think that there are a few sides, and I think for an example of that, like Scarlets are a good example of a club that will survive. And Cardiff, in defence of them in terms of the Welsh side, Cardiff have actually improved over the last few kind of years. They've built an okay team, but not quite competitive enough.
Yeah.
The Ospreys are one that really should be allowed to. They were an amalgamation of Neath and Swansea, who were rivals traditionally, and so like the local support just never got on board with it as a project or as a club or as anything else. And then this year was their lowest ever. They recorded 17 points by the time the season was finished. 17 league points for the Ospreys this year, which is pretty dismal. Like considering they were once one of the powerhouses. They were once upon a year, they were the Welsh national side, captained by Alan Wynne-Jones with Jerry Collins at 6 and Tommy Bowe in the back line. And that was the team. And they were constantly underperforming. But they've just been on steady decline.
The Kings.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, the Kings was a massive disappointment. But just in terms of the Pro 14, it definitely needs a shake-up. It needs something else because Leinster are head and shoulders above any other team in it at the moment, with good reason and good merit, but it would be nice to play a few more competitive fixtures. Certainly, it doesn't hold a candle to the top coutures or to the Premiership.
Which didn't used to be true. You know, we used to say, that the Premiership's overrated and the Pro 14 is actually perhaps a better standard league. You got Cardiff in the European semi-final or Edinburgh in the European semi-final.
Yeah,
it's definitely ebbed off in recent years. Doesn't mean that we're necessarily super far away, but I think definitely the Welsh sides in particular
have to
really there needs to be, and I'm not sure how much money they have to even do this, but there needs to be investment from the bottom up, if that makes sense, from academy levels all the way up. And this is just to fix their club game. They need someone like Rassie Erasmus coming into Welsh rugby and demanding that they improve their club game, because actually test-wise they fare okay. They managed to combine all their talents and put together a good team. It remains to be seen how well they'll do without Gatland.
Some kind of visionary.
It definitely does, because like from the time it turned professional, they've always been a parallel with the IRFU. Because when the game went professional, they're just across, they're neighbours. They're of a similar size. They're Six Nations teams like us as well, and we're in the same domestic competition. So we're always kind of abreast of what's going on in Wales. And where we kind of fell into, like the four provinces, Leinster, Ulster, Munster and Connacht, they are actual provinces that make up the country. They're definable regions. People do have a sense of identity.
And they were proper rugby teams.
And they were proper rugby teams as well. Munster beat the All Blacks in the 1970s as well. There was a proper tradition to build on, whereas the Welsh were tasked with kind of picking and choosing which club sides to support in the new model. They obviously kept Clonethley Scarlets, Cardiff Blues. They made up the Ospreys, and it just really hasn't worked. They for many years.
The
Dragons as well are to a lesser extent. The Dragons is just a very small region. However small Scarlets is, that Rodney Parade is a tiny wee venue in a tiny spot, and they haven't had the tradition to build on, but they haven't done it well. Undoubtedly, the professional game has not worked well with domestic rugby in Wales, and it's come to a head now. And like other things, COVID is kind of forcing these things into light, because every union was bleeding money throughout the lockdown. Every union was complaining about it. Like the Kings went bust. The RFU were making statements to the government a few months back about how the games need to be played. We're losing money, excellent, all of this.
Wales Wales cut their sevens team. They cancelled their sevens team. They got rid of them. So they're obviously not doing too well financially. The time for investment perhaps isn't now either. But sure, look, in terms of the Pro 14, I do think that it's a competition that's on the way. And I think the South African sides would be a great injection. It's not impossible that it improves, but for the time being, as much as we love winning it from a Leinster point of view, it's almost becoming a bit farcical. Like, especially this year, we didn't play our full team in any of the games and we won all of them.
Yeah.
That's a little crazy.
It is. It's lovely being Leinster fans, but
it's also down south. It's just, like South Africa and New Zealand need strong Australian sides, and
that's it's similar boat actually. Yeah, the Australian rugby is another one in terms of that, and actually I'm not sure how beneficial the kind of internalization of the game will be, because they're having their domestic comp, and they're like watching a few bits of it. There are certainly some terrible habits that are only dying to be exposed by a really polished New Zealand team or a really physical South African team, because like sometimes they're kicking ball away too early, they're soft in contacts, and these are things that the dynamic of international competition, you get found out.
I think the final is this weekend, isn't it?
It is.
Super BAU. It's Brumbies against the Rebels.
It's the Reds.
Oh, the Reds. Sorry. And I think the winner of that comp, if you put that team in Super Rugby Aotearoa, they would finish dead last and wouldn't win a game. Yeah. That's a difference in standard right there. Yeah. So it's another difficult one. Yeah.
No, sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm curious to see what the South African, because I know they only announced, I was reading today, they announced the framework for the four month season, domestic season that they're having, including a few kind of Springbok v Springbok games. They're doing a full, I think it starts in September, I think, and then there's an international in October.
26th, I think the 26th of this month, we have our first like a Super Sunday, a Super Saturday. So we have that once a year. It's our superhero day. So it's the four main franchises, and they play a double header.
Class. Very cool. That'll be great.
But it's going to be probably, obviously it's the first rugby game of the season, so it's probably not going to be the greatest showcase of skill. But
not to mention how many months now. You guys have been waiting the longest. It's more than 6 months since rugby switched off over there. Yeah, so you could expect a bit of rust.
The following weekend, or I think the weekend after that, is essentially a north-south game, but it's schoolboy rules. So 60 players. So you can pick your team one for one.
I love that. I hope they broadcast that picking process, because that'll be great. They should have them all stood in a row with the two coaches and just pick it out, literally like the studio.
Rusty on the one side, Jacques Niwa on the other side. So I think it'll be interesting. It'll be very interesting.
That would be interesting. That'll be a lot of fun, actually.
I would love to watch just the picking process and then obviously the game as well. But that's exciting, because obviously, as we said before, you are world champs, and we haven't seen any of your players playing apart from a few instances. Well, like we saw a few players getting injured. We saw Pollard, which was unfortunate to see.
That was brutal, and then Snyman, obviously,
Snyman for Munster was a terrible one as well, just dropped in the line out.
Yeah.
But I noticed that in that Munster game, no one catches any of the players.
Yeah, I know.
And you throw the player up, and then you say, okay, you're on your own.
Yeah, and he's Snyman is however tall, he's also leaping up into the air. They fire him up, release him at his highest point, so he goes even higher, and then he comes down. A guy that size comes down from such a height. Oh, it was very poor. It was terrible. Very poor. Yeah. Your marquee signing, and you do that 5 minutes into the game.
It was the first play he made. He stole a Leinster lineout in getting injured. That he was getting a read, and our lineout has been dodgy since lockdown. Like, he was getting a read, he would have been a serious asset for Munster in the game a couple of weeks after as well. It's a massive loss. He's an example. He is a huge player, and he's potentially a great Munster man as well. He's so physical and hard-nosed.
Freak athlete with a great mind for the game. I really rate. Yeah. He's going to be starting for the Box for many years, I'd say.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
for sure. He's got the skills, and he's got that enforcer kind of mold that the South Africans like.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just thinking now, where do we want to move on to?
Because okay, let's talk about your guys' favorite subject.
I'm not sure if it's our favorite subject.
It's been a source of much pain.
Let's talk Irish rugby. Like I've been watching. It's hard to gauge where you are at the moment, especially the Ulster game. I didn't really rate.
No.
The Munster game I also didn't rate. Some of the Munster Leinster games were very, very good, and because the season's been so broken up, I actually didn't really get an opportunity to watch a hell of a lot of games. So it's like I'm really in the dark. So it'd been really interesting to see. Maybe if you can just touch on maybe like some of the combinations you see, because like I look at it and I think, okay, if Sexton remains fit, he'll be 40 at the next World Cup. Don't see him going.
I'm not sure. He's 40.
Yeah, he will.
Is that right?
I think so. Yeah, but he talks a big game, Johnny Sexton. He thinks of himself as Tom Brady, and he thinks he's going to go on forever, and he's going to be the orchestrator of it all, and he's going to sit back and do it. Listen, that is one of the concerns. Irish rugby is at a crossroads. I mean, I really do think that the World Cup in Japan was absolutely brutal. Like in terms of it, like when you see what a 2018 we had. And then the fall from grace and the ugly, slow style of rugby that they were playing, and they couldn't break down Japan, and they couldn't get close to Japan. Japan were head and shoulders a better side than them, and hammered by the All Blacks, who they'd beaten a year previously, beaten off the pitch, and it was such an ugly show and such a heartbreak, really, in terms of an end to Joe Schmidt's tenure, that it has sort of leveled the national team back at sort of ground zero. They are building from scratch, I think. And I think the one of the first things, obviously, we have all this young personnel. We've quite a few young players, quite a few exciting players coming through, especially from the Leinster Academy. But I think that the first thing that we need to arrive at is a style of play that, because for so many years, Ireland has sort of, it's kind of bizarre how one-to-one the comparison is. Ireland has very much sort of been the Munster of international rugby, where we play this brutal physical game. We try and impose ourselves on teams. We usually have one big performance in us a season, which often we'll reserve for a big game against England or something like that, where we'll put it all together and outmuscle them and shock them physically and do them in with a big physical performance. But it's rarely enough attrition-wise to actually win any silverware or put together a whole season on. And I just think that we need to sort of zoom out and look at the 4 provinces and the talent pool that we have and make a decision as to what kind of team we want to be. And, do we want to play offensive rugby? Do we want to play a little bit of everything? I mean, I was saying earlier that Wales kind of possibly need to look at the Irish model for their club game. I think, by contrast, Ireland could look at the Welsh model that Gatland laid out for their national team, where Wales were just good at a bit of everything. They had very good players. They knew how to take tries, but they knew how to play physical rugby if need be. They knew how to play territory if need be. Yeah, they were very versatile,
very adaptable, and very cunning.
Yes,
very cunning. Because Ireland at their best, certainly when O'Connell was there, and they had a few of these stalwarts, but not even Ireland at their best. And Ireland from Eddie O'Sullivan's era was a very attacking team with some wily instincts. Used to be kind of clever, like with or without the ball. Good kind of wily sledging, stay in the right side of the ref. That is a big part and a characteristic of our teams. I think Leinster epitomise it great. Like they are very clever on defence. They don't overcommit at the breakdowns. They don't give away silly penalties when they don't need to, when they're in control. All of that was great under Joe Schmidt. He was very analytical and forceful of that. Like we were a disciplined side. If we were against an opposition who were loosey-goosey, we would just accrue the penalties and stay disciplined and win that way. And I don't think, as much as we are leveled, we don't need to forget all the things we've built under Joe Schmidt. I think we have a really good, solid team with a lot more depth than we've ever had. Like when we won the Grand Slam in 2009, Paddy Wallace came off the bench to cover 10. Like now we actually have a multitude of 10s who are much better players than Paddy Wallace, and that's a good place to be in. Same with the centres. We don't quite have the box office player that we had in Brian O'Driscoll in the back line, which has kind of led to a bit of our choice.
That's the once in a generation kind of player.
It is, exactly. And so is Sexton as well. So the drop off from Sexton to all the other 10s is a real one, but it's only a real one because Sexton is a properly elite level, world class 10. Once in a generation, and the other guys who in behind him are kind of young and haven't quite reached their peak yet.
But that said, I think the point is well taken that when it comes to Sexton, he's still the best out half in Ireland, no question. He's come back from lockdown and he looks just about as sharp as anybody. He's throwing great passes. He runs a backline so smoothly. I have a lot of time for him. I think he's a brilliant, really wise head to have in there. But we had Ronan O'Gara 10 years ago. And when Ronan O'Gara was getting on and he was getting into his 30s, he had Sexton riding up him, a young Johnny Sexton, riding up him, challenging him for his jersey, really putting the pressure on him, and then eventually taking it. And right now...
And before Welsh, it was David Humphreys as well, another quality 10.
Right now we have a lot of good young 10s, but actually we don't have anybody who's really threatening Sexton's jersey. It's still the case that, on the big day, Sexton's the guy you have to ride or die with.
Yeah.
And so we've a lot of young, promising players in Leinster. You know, Harry Byrne and Ross Byrne is the older brother, but Harry Byrne, his younger brother, looks very promising. Yeah. Kieran Frawley, who is a 10 but might move to 12, is another promising young player. Shane's a big fan of him.
Fan of Frawley. He's one of the 10s that we have who actually likes the physical. He's one of the closest in terms of the physicality Sexton brings, because all the other 10 options are slighter than Sexton and would present a different defensive picture, because Sexton does a lot of defending. For a 10, he does a lot of defending. He choke tackles boys. He really does fancy the contact. And Frawley is similar to him in that regard, whereas like your Carberries, your Cartys, your Hanrahan Madigan, your both of the Burns, they're slighter 10s. They would need to be protected a bit in the defensive line.
But yeah,
I look at it. Sorry, guys.
If
I look at say you're going to go into the next World Cup cycle. New Zealand's probably going to come with Richie Mo'unga. With a backup of Bowden Barrett. Good grief, what a backup. France are probably going to come with Intermuck.
Entpak and Camille Lopez is up
Camille
there
Lopez
as well.
Be in there as well, yeah.
So these are look at these young 10s coming through. Look, South Africa's in the same position. The drop off from 100 Pollard is just astronomical. So I've always tried to look at the next player in line, because that's generally your depth chart. For me, it's probably Curran Bosch. I think we should invest our money in him, but that's my personal opinion.
I agree. I like Curran a lot.
I think he's more of a like-for-like change with Pollard as well.
I just look at it. If you're going to be hitting foot, if he makes it to a World Cup, good on him. You know, Brits did it. Scott Brits did it. So stranger things have happened.
I'm sure he won't. But the thing that I would say is actually what Rassie proved the last World Cup is that you don't actually need to be in mad World Cup cycle mode until maybe about 2 years. Like Rassie put together that side in about 18 months.
Yeah.
And while he says, you know, he could have got them even better in the not finished article, they did win the competition. So I think from Ireland's point of view, in terms of like, I wouldn't worry about that stuff. Like Leinster are a good club side. You know, you have Harry Byrne, Ross Byrne, Kieran Frawley, Joey Carberry, Jack Carty. You have a lot of good young 10s, not quite at the test level yet. And the hope is that, you know, one of them will make the step up and that stuff will solve itself. I think what we need to figure out as an Ireland team is just playing positive rugby, really changing how we looked under Joe Schmidt and playing sort of, I think, a more Leinster style. We have a young, quick scrum, not that young, but a quick scrum half in Kieran Marmion, who I think will come in instead of Conor Murray.
Yeah. And the four halfbacks at the moment, if you're picking the side tomorrow, are Marmion, Sexton.
Yeah.
It's not Murray.
Yeah, no, it's not Murray. I think Murray's done. But I think Ireland just need to get playing quicker rugby, actually scoring tries, putting together more creative attacks, adding a bit of versatility to their game. Because at the meat of it, you know, we've got good locks, we've got good props for sure, we can scrum. And
the serious depth of back row, we can pick 3 or 4 different international caliber back rows
that could make a good defense. We have the bones of a nice backline. Gary Ringrose at 13 is a guy we've invested a lot of time in. I'd love him to make the step up and become an elite defender in the 13 channel and an elite passer in the 13 channel.
Yeah.
So I think if we just focus on playing positive rugby and getting good young form players like, you know, Caelan Darris as a back row is someone I'm very excited about. I'd love to see him get a go in the number 8 shirt.
Yeah,
lovely young player
for sure. I think the back 3 is one area ripe for mixing up for Ireland as well, because the conservatism of Joe Schmidt's era was maybe epitomised no more pronounced a fashion than Rob his back 3 selections. Rob Kearney and Keith Earls perpetually in there, despite not really having any flair or bringing any tries in general. Like it's one of the basic fun. Like we are very much, there's 2 schools of thought on a winger, what a winger should do. There's some people who love a pacey winger who's super flashy and will forgive the defensive frailties, or maybe they're rubbish under the high ball or don't have a read if they're really quick and create something. Or there's ones in Ireland where we're more on the side of like, is he good at rucking? Is he good in his defense line? Like even when James Lowe came to Leinster and was scoring tries every week, all the chat in off the ball or stuff was like, oh yeah, but is his defensive positioning good enough? Which is like, fair enough, he may need to improve there. But the point of a winger is to score your tries, for God's sake. And it's like we were creating. Yeah, exactly. Johnny May. And like what we do have as options at the moment, we have Conway, Larmour, Stockdale, And James Lowe is now Irish qualified. Did allude to the fact that he'd be ready to answer the call. Those are 4 elite attacking players. 3 of them do play at 15 sometimes for their club as well. So you can do any combination of them. But those are the 4 that you need to pick your back 3 from. And they're all competent under the high ball without any of them being as expert at it as Rob Kearney, but they are all more dynamic and more attacking as a threat going forward. And it could just inject a bit more tempo. Ireland need to play with more tempo with the ball in hand. We need to have more ways of scoring tries. Yeah. It's been a problem. Like, it's one of the great compliments we have of New Zealand is that their tries can look so different. Like, they can score in so many ways. They can do the turnover on their own 5-meter line, flick it wide, coast to coast try. They can do a 5-meter maul try. They can strike off scrums. They have a million different ways to score a try. Whereas Ireland over the last few years have kind of boiled it down 2 or 3. They all look the same. They're either an attacking line out with a one set piece move that does cut them open on the first phase. Hurrah, great planning. That's a lovely try. Or they're a million phases, picking jams or a maul.
There have been fewer and fewer of them. If you were to watch a sort of a highlight reel, especially against the top sides, of every try Ireland scored in the last 4 years, you would get a lot of the same looks. It's very much picking and jamming from that area. And I just think in terms of having more tools to your arsenal, they need to be playing a more creative game so that they can, when the heat gets on in 4 years' time. It's all about developing players now. It's all about getting them used to playing at the very, very top level and operating at speed at that level so they can have sort of the best skills possible. But I'm not sweating the personnel per se. I think there's good young lads there. What I'm sweating is the coach, the coaching. Andy Farrell and Mike Catt. This is the new team. Andy Farrell was Joe Schmidt's assistant coach. He's a defensive coach, and Mike Catt has come in to take the attack. And that is, like, we had a Six Nations just gone there where, well, it's actually still going on. We're going to wrap it up. It stopped mid-pandemic, where everything was looking very similar to how it looked under Joe Schmidt, which I think is just an inevitable road to failure. So it's a big question mark at the moment, but the biggest thing I'm concerned about is Ireland just playing that same slow style that was exposed last year by Japan of all teams.
Yeah, well, to carry the analogy that Dara outlined with it, like, it is a very Munster-esque way of performing is what the Irish team do. And Munster have been bemoaning the fact that over the last few years they're constantly in semi-finals and no further. Like, they're not winning competitions. It's not winning rugby in essence. And it's even got harder because the interpretation since lockdown of the breakdown means that if you're a team that wants to take it through 20 or 30 phases to apply pressure, you better be precise cleaning that ruck out and keep your feet, because the refs are going to ping you straight away when you don't. So the onus is on you to score quicker. Like, you have the ball, you got to use it. And Ireland definitely, like, we were guilty of kind of killing games that way, killing the clock that way. It was kind of playing an NFL style kind of mold to the rugby game, using a lot of territory and a lot of clock management, which is interesting. It was an interesting look as a neutral, because it was an unusual way of playing the game.
It worked in 2018, and then everyone figured it out.
Yeah, everyone figured it out a year out from the World Cup, and it ultimately amounted to losing in a quarter-final. It wasn't enough. There's a ceiling on that style of play. You need to be a bit more creative. Like, I can't remember the last time Ireland scored off kick return, like directly in the same phase as a loose kick, punishing it with a try, which the All Blacks do all the time. Even the South Africa are good at that. England are brilliant at that. France, excellent too. Wales, potentially. Like, we just don't score that try. And then one try that we used to have in our locker many years ago with Brian, like the first phase strike off scrums. I don't know. I can't remember the last time Ireland didn't just hit up the 12 channel off a scrum in the midfield. That's just seemingly what we do now. And it really pains me to do that, because, like, to watch a New Zealand game with Justin Marshall's commentary is to know just what an opportunity for the backline to play the scrum is, because Marshall's always, like, enthusiastically calling out all the shapes he sees, normally with a good read on what the backline are trying to do. And New Zealand are always so innovative. All their teams try and do strike things off scrum. I would love for just a little bit more focus on that, being more creative in the phase play and in the strike play. I hope we can start building these things, because I think it's not like it's no time to panic and throw everything out. We still have a very good competitive team and a good ethos and good quality players, but we do need to be sharper. We need to just have a better tempo with our ball in hand. We are awfully slow to look at. Whereas watching Leinster every week, like, when they're at their best, it's the furiousness of the tempo that makes teams buckle. because when you can get, like, as much as going through phases is great, it needs to be quick. It needs to be quick to test defenses. Quick ruck ball. It's an age-old law in rugby, but quick ruck ball works.
Simple formula.
Simple
formula.
Yeah, exactly.
No, like I must admit, I've always looked at the New Zealand side, and I think I wrote it down. It's an economy of effort.
Yes.
And like the New Zealand side there are 6 phases they'll kick, and if they haven't scored, they'll kick the ball away. It's simple enough. You know what I mean? Then you say, okay, your turn now. Let's have a turnover on defense. Another 6 phases. Okay, I haven't scored, kick it away. But I just look at the New Zealand side, 1 to 6 phases, and they're scoring points. And I watched one Wales game when I was much younger, and I think 36 phases, and they scored a try, and it was amazing. I thought it was the most amazing thing. But you've got to be so disciplined for 36 phases. And geez, you must be bloody tired playing 36 phase tries when the opposition are in 30 seconds does the exact same thing.
That's the problem. That's the biggest problem. Like Ireland have almost romanticized the 40 phase score. I remember we did it in 2018 against France in Paris. We had that restart and we kicked a drop goal to win it. Sexton kicked a drop goal. We went from our own 22 to the opposition 10 before Sexton kicked it.
In 42
and we
phases.
took 42 phases to do that, and it was just constant hit up and hit up and hit up. And it's sort of that grinding, ugly game. But what happens is you can do that against the All Blacks, as you say. You can start a game like a house on fire, put them under all kinds of pressure, and dominate the game for 10 minutes, and then come away with a score 7-0, and then fall asleep for a moment. 7-0.
Exactly.
Start again. And there's a beauty in that, what the All Blacks do. It's punishing. There's a lesson in there for us all.
There's definitely utility in the phase game, and it's different. It's horses for courses as well, because Leinster actually employed a similar tactic against Toulouse in not this season gone, the season before. And like against a side like France or a side like Toulouse, and even against New Zealand when we beat them, holding the ball for that many phases against a team that likes to attack is a good play. But it frustrates them. But if you run into the Springboks, who love to defend and want to try and play a 30-phase plus game, winning every contact, you're just not going to. And actually, Wales is another one who consistently unstuck us with that kind of game as well, because Wales love defending. They love chop tackling Irish boys. They will do it all day. So you have to have a few more strings to your bow. It's okay to hold the pill against France, frustrate the hell out of them. Australia too. They'll get frustrated. They'll give penalties away. You'll end up building the scoreboard and winning the game that way. That's fine. But you need to acknowledge that, like, you're not a bigger side than England or South Africa or Wales, and they love tackling you. So maybe you might want to use the pill a bit more efficiently and effectively and with pace, which is that's essentially what I want to see from Ireland, from a new Ireland, is a quicker speed of play. And I think it starts with picking Marmion on form, getting him in there, speedy halfback at 9. Let Sexton make the decisions, because one of the things about the Murray-Sexton axis by the end of it is that they're two generals and two thinkers, so it's kind of too many cooks situation. Every decision has to be a conference, and everything takes too long. Whereas if you just have Marmion who'll provide good quick ball, then Sexton can maybe run the back line, and it's a new look back line, and certainly used to playing pacey, attacking footy. Like, it's definitely true. Like, Connacht play attacking quick tempoed rugby, as do Ulster when they're at their best, and Leinster definitely do. So it's 3-1 in terms of tempo. I think Ireland should have more of a tempo based game than they do right now, and that's something I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing implemented.
So we don't have much more time, so I just want to a few more, just one or two more questions about the Irish side. So if I look at the South African side, if I look at depth, the player depth, what kind of positions do you think might be a concern? And I would never have said 6 months ago that we'd have a problem at lock, but it seems like we have a depth problem at lock at the moment. So
you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
I think South Africa will produce more locks.
Come on now, I'm not worried about you.
No sooner will you have found a brand spanking new glorious prop than Simon will recover from injury, and you'll have 6 world class locks next year instead of the 4 you brought to the World Cup.
You'll be absolutely fine at lock. I wouldn't worry about it. From an art.
Do you see any issues?
I mean, I like it. There's a few. It's just a question of whether the new talent makes the step up, because there's enough players at all levels who are young in all positions it's just a question of whether they make the step up. Because, with Cian Healy at the moment, and
Kilcoyne
in behind him, we've Kilcoyne from Munster, who's getting on. But Cian Healy has been sort of a rock of a loosehead for Ireland for 10 years. And he's actually, I've watched him for years. I really have rated him as one of the best for pretty much his whole tenure. He's been one of the best looseheads in the world. And watching him play in week out and week out has been a joy.
Yeah.
But then when he retires, we don't have a world-class player to step in there.
No.
So I'd be worried a little bit. I think we have two very strong tight heads. I'd be worried a little bit at loosehead. But we've young guys coming through at Leinster, and we just need, when Cian Healy broke through, he was a skinny, quick prop.
Yeah.
And then he spent, I think 2 years nonstop in the gym and came out a monster. And I think that it remains to be seen whether our young props do that. But to be sure, we'll have issues at loosehead if Cian Healy were to get injured tomorrow.
I kind of have them listed out. Like Kilcoyne is the heir apparent and the guy who had been wearing the 17 jersey as first backup. But there's also Byrne has had a great season for Leinster in that position. Jeremy Loughman for Munster. Like, one thing Munster do produce is good scrummaging props, and Loughman is definitely one of them. Dooley is another good prospect, a Burman from Leinster who kind of picked up an injury. We haven't seen him since the lockdown, but was looking very good at the start of the season as well. And then there's James Cronin in Munster too. So there are good quality guys in behind, and that kind of list is a similar length for all positions. Like on the tight head, you have Furlong and Porter are the two main tight heads and are international caliber. Ryan at Munster is also a solid option at 3. And then behind him, you have the likes of Bent, O'Toole, Archer, Moore, Beelum.
Those guys aren't at the level. So there is a drop off where we're a small country in the sense that we don't have, if we get 2 injuries in a position, we're going to be stretched.
Yeah.
Really, no matter what the position is.
Yeah.
Apart from maybe back row. But in terms of actually a weakness in the test team, outside of the terrible scenario where nobody rises to the level at 10 behind Sexton, I don't see too much concern. There's quite a bit of depth at centre. There's quite a bit of depth at back 3. There's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. And I will say that there's one other lad that I'd mention is a very young guy who burst onto the scene in Leinster this year, Ryan Baird, who's a lock.
Big mobile lock forward.
I think he's going to be starting for Ireland come November with James Ryan. He's a very exciting young guy, very, very quick for a big man. He's a big physical guy.
Scored a try against Glasgow last season where he broke the line at the halfway line and stepped the fullback and then went over and then wasn't even out of breath afterwards. He's a super looking athlete.
So there's plenty of people to be excited about. It's just the question is whether we can put it all together.
Yes, as is always the case with Ireland. Will we perform on the big day? Who knows?
Yes, I've got just 2 more questions. Then we can call it a night.
Sure.
So. I've got to say that I'll find out in the next day or 2 if I got my Lions ticket. So
awesome,
excellent.
Just hoping. I'm not going to an international. It was just too expensive, so I'm just going to go watch them play the Stormers. But that's okay.
Who are you going to be rooting for?
It's a tough one. So I may have to put on my Stormers cap. We'll see. We'll see. But so obviously, I'm looking forward to that. But just one last question on Ian Foster's the New Zealand side. What were your thoughts on it? Do you think New Zealand are going in the right kind of direction with their newer players, their younger blood?
Yeah, I've been sort of up and down on New Zealand. We've sort of had a video on New Zealand and sort of what went wrong in 2019, sort of in the works for a very long time.
Yes.
But I think they have had issues. I think the Crusaders are great, obviously a great club side, but can at times be harmful to just, if the All Blacks want to try and play that way, they're actually much more formulaic and less instinctive, obviously with the exception of the world-class Richie Mo'unga. Than perhaps, a Chiefs team would have been back in the day. So I think there's just a tinge of concern. Like I remember when the Lions tour in 2017, the last Lions tour in New Zealand, exposed some cracks in their thinking. They were playing a little less, all black rugby and a little more northern rugby. Like you had Bowden Barrett trying to get his drop goal game in, and they were trying to play a bit more forward-oriented rugby. And there are more sides in world rugby who can cope with that if that's what New Zealand are bringing. So I think just in terms of stylistically building on from that side that lost in 2019, they just have to be careful not to get sucked into that same mindset that I think did cost them.
Yeah.
They want to be the All Blacks. The All Blacks, like South Africa being true to their identity in terms of being physical and forward-oriented. The All Blacks need to be true to their identity, and that is being the quickest, most skilled team with the best talent, really, of anybody in World Rugby.
Yeah.
And, you know, as concerned as I have been for them, I watched that North-South game, and I wasn't concerned.
That was an
incredible game of rugby.
Incredible sides who could walk into either the Rugby Championship or the Six Nations and be competitive.
Those two sides, they could easily knock out most Test teams.
Yeah,
it was a brilliant game of super enthusiastic attacking rugby with really talented young guys, and there's a few guys who are super exciting. Will Jordan and Hoskins Sotutu in particular. Sotutu's going to take that number 8 jersey, and I think he's going to take it.
He looks like Reed in the wide channels. He's beating players, getting offloads away. It's great.
And Will Jordan is just the latest brilliant winger back 3 player to come out of there. So I think they're like, if there's a rugby championship this year, they're favourites. They look very, very good.
One thing I'm excited about Rico at 13 has looked great, and the All Blacks have needed something in the centres. That's one point we were citing pre-World Cup. Yeah, he's so quick. He adds so much pace to that channel. He's a really good defender as well.
Yeah, it's so rare when you get a winger who makes that move to the centre and then can be that effective on defence.
Yeah,
and Rico Ioane looks very effective. In fact, a matchup between him and Am, if the South Africans if Springboks were to play the All Blacks this year, that would be one of the box office matchups at 13, and they could both shut each other out. So I think the All Blacks, in terms of talent, no concern at all. They could get tripped up. They always have their issues, and there are a lot of other good teams out there. But I think as the World Cup cycle starts, they once again started, I think, perhaps with the mantle of favourites, just because of the sheer talent.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing, I did another show with Hockey Time Rugby and the rugby analyst, and we were chatting about this exact thing, and we were just talking about I love attacking rugby. We all love attacking rugby, and we can watch it all day. It's absolutely wonderful. But if that's the style of rugby that they're going to be playing against each other, they're not going to really be exposed to a team like South African side who relies heavily on set pieces, who's going to grind you out in your scrums, is going to maul you to death, is going to hit you in your lineouts. So you got the Brumbies who just grind out a game all day. They'll just sit there and grind. And if you're going to play a competition amongst yourself, or you're going to include teams that play the same kind of rugby that you play, from an entertainment point of view, it's wonderful. But from an actually getting the exposure to different styles of rugby, I don't think it's super beneficial. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. I don't know if I buy it necessarily, just because I think that New Zealand really should be looking at the model of that side in 2015 that were so much better than everyone else. They had a lot of world-class players, but sure, they do now. But I think that side, it just embodied, there was almost an arrogance to them, but because they had the skill level, that it was just a relentless self-belief and a relentless backing of their own skills, to the extent that it was it doesn't matter what you do. You can dominate the set piece, you can put pressure on us. You're going to have to score 30 points at least, because we're going to score 35 or we're going to score 28, because you give us an instant, we're going to get a try. And I think New Zealand doubling down on honing that skill, the ability to get a try in the blink of an eye, that is what makes the All Black rugby so great. And I think they lost their way in the last couple of years, building up to the World Cup, trying to expand their game to cope with all of those kind of things. And they would have had that on their mind, the fact that there's other teams playing this style of rugby and that style of rugby, and maybe we need to learn how to grind a game out. But I actually think they lost their way doing that. And then ultimately it ended up failing in the World Cup last year. So I think them going back to their roots and trying to rediscover that score a try, dominate the game offensively, teams can't hurt us if we do that. If we can score a try off every turnover. Yeah, so
I love to prove them wrong.
Yeah. Well,
I really do, because I'm gonna be honest. The whole Super Rugby series, the North-South game, was probably the most entertaining rugby we've seen in years.
Oh, it was brilliant. Yeah. To be fair,
off the scale.
I think all countries are going to suffer for the isolation of it. Certainly we were pointing out the Australian domestic comp is not of the top standard, and they are waiting to be exposed. I don't think the same could be said about Super Rugby Aotearoa. I think there were some really good quality games throughout, and it culminated in that North-South thing. And sure, now the Mitre 10's kicked off in the last couple of weeks, and all the internationals are playing Mitre 10 provincial rugby now as well for them. Like they're in rude health as far as caliber, and they can play they can isolate themselves and play competitive high quality footy for a long time, longer probably than any other country could given the circumstances. But they will, as you say, be hankering for the challenge. They want to go to the altitude in South Africa and try and take on some big buck forwards in that environment. They want to test their skills that way for sure. But it just remains to be seen when that will happen.
Yeah,
and you need to keep sharp in between now and then.
I don't think the Rugby Championship's going to happen this year. I really don't.
It doesn't look that way, does it? Like the All Blacks are thinking about pulling out. The Springboks haven't committed to anything. So, especially with the Springboks have the Lions tour in the back of their mind as well, and just preparing for that. So,
is it like a Lions tour brings in essentially almost R1 billion? So it's
Are we going to have fans at it though, and how big an impact is that going to be? I mean, obviously they've decided to plow ahead with it next year. I hope everything goes well for it, but I would hate to see it squandered and like you'd almost prefer to see them put it back to 2022 if that means they could get all the fans in and all the revenue that's associated with it.
Right.
So it's just a touch wood situation that it all works out there, because obviously Lions Tour is one of the great.
Well, no, knowing my luck, I bought my tickets and I'll win it won't be a game. But listen, guys, I don't want to keep you any longer. We've gone 15 minutes over the hour.
Yeah. Brilliant. That sounds perfect. Listen, a lot of fun chatting.
Yeah, it has been absolute fun. And I'm really glad I had the chat, because it has been a while and it's been actually quite super entertaining. I really have enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, us too. Likewise. Yeah, it's great to be back and knock off the podcast rust and get back at it.
Yes, exactly right. And always fun chatting to you as well, Don. I bet we'll talk South Africa, we'll talk Ireland, we'll talk all kinds of things in the future.
Yes.
I'm excited for the South African comp though. That's my next exciting thing, because I only read that today that you were getting a domestic comp going and that kind of schoolyard pick thing. So maybe we can do a preview for that in the weeks come.
Great, guys. But if people want to see your channel, you just want to do a quick plug on your channel.
So it's just youtube.com/Overlap Rugby podcast, and you'll get us there. You can get us at Overlap Rugby on Twitter as well. But the YouTube channel is where we spend most of our time. Although we've been missing recently, you can expect new content now coming in the coming weeks as well. So listen, thanks a million for hosting us, Don, and looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Yeah, cheers, everyone.
See you. Thanks for watching, everyone.